Hello, everybody. I'm Marty Owings. Welcome to Capital Conversations. Tonight is Tuesday, February 5th, 2013. Well, it's been a big week up here at the Capitol, and joining us tonight is House Majority Leader Erin Murphy, representing District 64A.
Hey, Marty.
I represent Murphy. Thanks for coming back on the program. And also Senator David Hann. He's the Minority Leader in the Senate, and has been kind enough to join us tonight. And returning is our occasional guest host, Paul Gardner, former legislator and House member up here. So lots going on tonight and this week. Let's talk. They're calling it Gun Week up here, but before we get to that, that's kind of a scary euphemism or whatever. But let's talk about the budget a little bit. Okay, Governor came out with his budget, and lots of stuff in the governor's budget. I think the GOP's response was generally expected. But what some people are surprised by, and this is for you, Majority Leader, is some of the response or lack of response by the DFL in terms of some of the governor's proposals. So I want to talk to you about specifics tonight a little bit and get your take on some of those specifics, such as tax on clothing, business-to-business tax, the sales tax. Why aren't some of the Democrats being very specific about whether or not they're going to embrace those pieces of the governor's budget?
So I think for your viewers, we are at the very beginning of the legislative cycle, and we're going to use the months ahead until early May to set the budget. And we're going to be very deliberative in that process. And the first point of that, of course, is getting the governor's budget proposal, which we got about 2 weeks ago. Yeah. And the next step, of course, will be the February forecast. That sort of sets the boundaries for us in terms of the budget and the trajectory for spending, et cetera, going forward. And it is an important document for us in consideration of the budget. So I think, again, for the viewers, this sort of what does the DFL think of this is a question that has been very persistent here. But I think it's important for Minnesotans for them to know that we're going to be very deliberative in this process. So that means, for me, we're going to look at the governor's budget, and we're going to understand it, and it's going to be heard. And they've heard it in Texas, and they've heard it in Ways and Means, and they're going to look at the policy proposals that are embraced in that budget. And we're going to understand what that means for Minnesotans and the state of Minnesota going forward. But the legislative process is one of collaboration. And, if I didn't hear, why don't you people get along a little more at the doors more than anything else, I heard that. I think Minnesotans want us to take a look at the budget. They want us to think about what they shared with us over the summer and fall. Right. And they want us to work on a budget that meets their priorities. And the governor's budget actually does a great job in terms of reflecting what I heard at the doors from people. They want to make sure we they balance the budget honestly. Right. They want to make sure that we're paying attention to education because they understand that is important for our future. They want some property tax relief, and they want to look at jobs and education. And so we're going to look at that budget. We're going to add our own good ideas through this process. Right. We're going to be deliberative about it, and we're going to deliver a budget for the people of Minnesota.
Before we get to Senator Hann, I want to just mention that was a nice pivot, and I heard some talking points, but again, we're not at specifics. What about the specific? I mean, you guys have been, the DFL in general has embraced some of the governor's specifics in his budget and been happy to talk about those. Mm-hmm. The more controversial ones, though, again, what about this tax on clothing? What about the B2B taxes? Anything in there you want to address?
Well, I'm happy to talk about each of those, but I want to reflect on what Minnesotans shared with us. They're tired of seeing the legislature punt balancing the budget going forward. They would like us to do it for real. They are tired of the deficits to deficits to deficit situation. So what I think Minnesotans are asking us to do is to do a good and deliberative job in balancing the budget. We're going to look at the business to business. We're going to look at sales taxes. We're going to look at the tax on clothing, and we're going to consider those things in the context of what we heard from Minnesotans and in the context of what we think is best for the future.
Well, majority leader, that's not an answer. That's not. Those aren't answers. Those aren't specifics.
Well, let me.
The good news about the job that I have, and I'm so lucky to have been elected as the majority leader for the Minnesota House for the Democrats. But I have to be reflective of their perspective.
No,
and they're just beginning to look at that. So for me to stand here or sit here and say this is what I think or the caucus thinks on very specific issues forecloses the discussion that we need to have. And we need to have that discussion.
But you
If
guys,
I could-
go ahead. Go ahead,
Art.
Paul.
And just for full disclosure, Representative Murphy and I served together in the House and were elected together. We're in some of those rooms deliberating things.
We're happy for you, Gard.
Yes. The thing I noticed in 2009, when Chair Lancheski of the House Tax Committee, she proposed things like ending loopholes, exemptions, credits, and deductions. And my observation was that it was very hard to find something to simplify as a message, because when I talk to voters about tax expenditures and broadening and lowering the sales tax, or lowering one tax and raising another, which is kind of what the governor's proposing, people's eyes would kind of glaze over. And it was hard to figure out how you're going to get 68 votes, no matter what party you're in, to sell that kind of complexity. Is it fair to say you're trying to figure out how a caucus is going to get behind some sort of position with lots of complexity in it?
Well, I think it's fair to say that we have a lot of new members in our caucus, and they are doing their due diligence on the governor's proposal, and they also want to talk about their own ideas, because they talked with Minnesotans a lot about fair taxation. They talked about making sure everybody's paying their fair share and making sure that we're balancing the budget for real. And I want to honor that. I think it's important not only to the members of our caucus, but to the people that they represent.
I noticed that when I ran for office, saying, let's clean up the tax code was never something that resonated with people. Like, what does that mean? And so I think a lot of members have probably come with their own particular positions and are now comparing those with the governor. Would that be fair to say, and seeing where there's some alignment?
That would be fair to say.
Okay.
Senator Hann. Hann.
You guys have been doing great.
Weigh in. Well, we're
don't worry.
asking the questions. We'll get to yours. But your thoughts on the governor's budget and the DFL's position?
Well, I think they have a tough position, frankly. I think the governor's budget is hard to understand. He's talked a lot about having $1 billion shortage between the growth in revenue and the growth in spending. And to solve that $1 billion problem, he's talked about a balanced approach, which amounts to $3.5 billion of new taxes. That doesn't make a lot of sense on the face of it. And then when you look at the specific taxes that he's proposed, the biggest chunk of them are sales taxes, $2 billion plus in sales taxes that are going to hit everybody, business to business, a lot of expansion of sales taxes that are going to hit everybody in the economy.
Yeah.
Most people look at this and they say, I don't get it, I don't understand this, and what are the monies going to be used for? What are the budgetary proposals, the spending proposals that are going to be benefiting from all this increased revenue? And the big single thing is a rebate, if you will, on property taxes, $1.4 billion. The other things that he's talking about spending money on are much smaller in scope and certainly don't require a $3.5 billion increase in revenue to fund those things. So I think when people look at all that, they say, well, you're asking us to sacrifice a lot, and you're asking the middle class and ordinary working families to spend a lot more money in sales taxes. You're asking businesses to do a lot more in terms of raising prices, I guess, to account for the business-to-business burden. And what are we going to get from that? It looks like what we're going to get is pretty much the same thing we have right now, but it's just going to cost more money. And that's the big idea that the governor's trying to sell. And I just don't think it's making a lot of traction if you can gauge from the response that you're getting in the public. And we as Republicans are asking those same questions. It doesn't make sense, and I think the people of Minnesota are saying it doesn't make sense.
But wouldn't it be fair to say that a lot of tax experts and nonpartisan experts and analysts for years have been saying we need to streamline the tax code, we need to focus on not just taxing products but also services, because now in the 30 or 40 years since the sales tax was put in place, the tax base has changed. So a lot of people have said sooner or later we'll have to bite that bullet. And at the same time, there's also a significant reduction in the corporate franchise tax, which tends to help a lot of small businesses. Do you think that those are all, those seem to be things that experts have said needed to happen sooner or later? And so is Governor Dayton showing some courage there by suggesting some stuff that is going to be very tough?
Gauging from the reaction that I've heard from the business community, they're not warmly embracing this. So I don't think they're looking at this as a streamlining and an opportunity to make the business climate more attractive. And that really is when you talk about what can we do to streamline the business taxation in particular. Typically, what you're trying to do is make the business climate better in Minnesota. And businesses aren't responding to the governor's proposals and saying, well, this is helpful. What they're saying is it's not helpful, it's harmful, it's more complex, it's not going to help. So I guess if that was the intent, it's not successful. I do think there's an argument to say we should have a better tax code, I just don't think what the governor's proposing is accomplishing.
Well, with respect to what Senator Hann was saying, their Majority Leader Murphy, what about this $500 tax rebate, or the property tax rebate that's come under fire, not just from Republicans, but some moderate Democrats, and Democrats have said it seems like a bludgeon when maybe a scalpel was needed. In other words, $500 to the guy who owns $1 million, property, $500 to the $30,000 a year single mom. What about, what do you say to that?
So, as we have been balancing the budget with borrowing and one-time funds for the past decade, we have put a lot of pressure on property taxes across the state of Minnesota. And in the last 2 years, with the elimination of the market value homestead credit, people all over the state, homeowners, farmers, small business owners, were talking about their property taxes and that they're going up. And I think Minnesotans definitely want us to rebalance that, to look at the various taxes that are raised and stop putting so much pressure on the property tax. It's regressive, especially for people with fixed incomes. It is becoming a real burden for them. So I think the governor is taking his approach with the refund, a refundable credit, and we're going to take a look at that too. A lot of our members talked with Minnesotans about various measures to be able to put some relief on property tax payers, and we're gonna have our own ideas about that. But we're going to consider the governor's proposal as well. Now, the governor he first of all worked very hard on proposing this budget, and I give him a lot of credit for that. And I do think it takes some courage to put out a budget that has a lot of vision in it for the future of Minnesota, and I really like that about what he's done. But he's also said, if you don't like my idea, bring your own idea, and I will consider that, and we'll consider that together. And I know that's what Minnesotans want. They're tired of an ideological framework that says no new taxes, no new this, no new that. They want us to really look at the budget as a document that is going to propel the future of Minnesota. They want to make sure that middle-class families have an opportunity of prosperity. Yeah. And I think they understand that some people in Minnesota could pitch in a little more to make the tax code more fair and to make life in Minnesota a little easier for all of us, business owners and Minnesotans. But we need to listen to all of the Minnesotans, yeah. And we will. And we're going to bring that diligence to the budget proposal, well, including our look at property taxes.
And in fairness to you, it's 2,000 pages, or there and abouts. But, Senator Hann, what about Majority Leader Murphy's point that at least the governor kept his promise? Now, he said, you knew what to expect. I mean, he was going to propose a budget that he said was going to equalize and level the playing field and tax the wealthiest who he didn't feel were paying their share. Do you give him credit for at least sticking to his word?
Well, I think he certainly kept his promise. We didn't have any illusions about that. He ran on a very ideological idea that he wanted to raise taxes, and we all knew that. He wasn't making an economic argument. He wasn't saying this was going to help the economy. He just said it was something we had to do.
Oh, I would say that he's very much interested in the economy and middle-class families.
I have yet to hear the argument that says raising taxes helps grow the economy, but if somebody's going to make that argument, the governor hasn't made it.
He made a great argument at the chamber back in 2011.
He's making an argument that says raising taxes is just the right thing to do. It's an ideological argument that he's making, that we have to raise tax burdens on some to allow us to have the tax code be more fair. Doesn't solve any economic problems, doesn't make the economy grow. He's talking about an ideological position that he has about taxes, which is fair enough. He's made that very clear. He ran for governor on that basis, and he's promised to do it, and now he's trying to make that happen. However, when you look at the actual taxes he has proposed, what has been surprising is that he has, in fact, looked at an expansion of sales taxes as the biggest part of his tax plan. That's where most of the money is coming from. And this has been a little bit surprising to us, that he has said, yeah, well, here's where we're going to get the money. We're going to get the money from everybody. So we're going to talk about taxing these wealthy people, but oh, by the way, we're really going to take the money from the middle class and everybody else.
But I think it would be fair to say that if you lower the tax on products and you focus on expanding the sales tax to something like legal and accounting services, which people who have some means pay, as opposed to blue-collar folks, the Joe Sixpack doesn't, and you're the Joe Sixpack and you're...
Well, that's assuming Joe Sixpack doesn't take advantage of any of those services, because when you have business-to-business taxes that you're going to put on to those businesses, who buys those services? Don't those additional fees get passed on to consumers? And they do. And so when you say, well, those businesses are going to be the ones that pay those taxes and they're wealthier people, well, wait a minute. Those services and those products that they offer to the public are being paid for and purchased by ordinary people, and those higher prices are going to be paid for by ordinary people. So those taxes end up getting paid for by ordinary people.
Do you foresee a situation, though, where some people would have actually a lower tax burden, and some people might have a higher one, or is it all going to be a wash?
Everybody's going to have a higher tax burden. Everybody. You cannot go out and say, we're going to collect $3.5 billion of new tax revenue from this economy, new tax streams, and not expect to say that everybody is going to pay more in taxes. Everybody will. That is the fact. I think that's been confirmed by all the things I've seen on the budget.
Would you argue that some of the services that middle-class folks use have been cut over the last few years, so they actually have been
I would
losing
say,
something
I would
at the
say
same-
that based on the budget that we passed, there was a, we spent more money in our budget than we did the year before, so there was perhaps a reduction in the expectation. We certainly, if you said, well, we want to spend this much and we're only going to spend this much, but we're actually spending this right now, we grew the budget, maybe not as much as some people wish, so there was a lowering of expectations. But we have grown the budget year after year in this state, and that, frankly, is part of the challenge that we face, is can we continue to grow the budget at a rate that is faster than the growth of the economy? And that's what the governor's budget is proposing, 8% growth in spending when you've got an economy that's struggling to grow at, what, 2% or 3%, whatever it is.
Middle-class families have experienced increases in tuition costs. Their kids
That's a
are
good
in-
idea,
their
but you're
kids
right.
are- Their
But
kids
what's
are in
driving
classes,
those
the
tuition
kids are in
costs?
classes with, 40 students. Their healthcare costs have gone up as we've gone from Minnesota Care to a healthy contribution program that no one's enrolling in because it's too expensive. As we have cut the budget, people have seen their property taxes go up, their tuition
that's
costs
not-
go up.
that's not the case.
Their
I know that's not the
childcare
case.
costs go up. There is a relationship between the budget that was put in place in 2 years ago and the pressure on middle-class families in Minnesota.
Well, let's talk about the facts then
And
about
they understand
this.
that we need to
Yeah,
balance the budget honestly
Let's talk
for
about the facts
future.
about the property taxes. And I remember seeing, and we can go back and look, but Commissioner Franz brought a document to the committee that we had. We were looking at the budget back in 2011. Every year for the past 20 years, property taxes in the state of Minnesota have gone up.
Yeah.
Under Republicans, under Democrat majorities, which has been true most of the time in that past 20 years, property taxes across the state have gone up every year. You can't blame increasing property taxes on Republicans, and we've been in the majority 2 years out of the past 20. Except for 1 year, and that was the year that Governor Ventura had the Jesse checks and he bought back the school
Well,
local.
I
But
I
other
just
than
have to
that 1
disagree
year,
that- with
other
that
than that
premise
1
because
year,
Governor
every year,
Pawlenty-
property taxes went up,
No, Governor
going back to
Pawlenty
20 years.
insisted-
This was before Governor,
insisted-
this is going back before Governor Pawlenty.
Governor Pawlenty insisted on balancing the budget, along with the
This is-
Republicans in the House who were in
But the
control for 8
point
years.
is that property taxes
without-
have gone up every year preceding Governor Pawlenty. And so to blame the fact that property taxes, which are out of the control of state government, on what goes on in state government, I think is a fiction.
Yeah, but Senator Hann, I mean, realistically, you're decoupling the two, and they seem related.
Well, they are related to some degree, but not in the way that is being argued here.
And
And
Minnesotans
the point I'm
understand
trying to
it.
make is that if you look at the actual rates of the increase in property taxes, they are not related to the fact that Republicans were in control of the legislature in the last 2 years, or the passage
Yeah.
of the homestead value tax
Okay.
credit.
Fair enough. We're going to move on to another issue, but before we do that, Majority Leader Murphy, I want to give you one more chance to address some of these specifics. Okay, so why, I mean, if the Democrats have had time to look at the governor's budget and say, yes, we agree with this, we agree with this, we agree with this, and talk specifics, which they have in the media and to others, why won't you address the specifics about the property tax thing or the business-to-business taxes? I mean, are those things you're not prepared to side with the governor on, just plain?
No, I think, as I've said before, and I understand your impatience on the question. I
Well,
do.
but a lot
I
of people
think-
are asking that, they want to know.
I sure know, I sure understand that, and I'm not getting a lot of questions from the people I represent saying, why won't you say this? They want us to do the job that we've been asked to do. It's going to take us a little while, and the answers to the questions about the specifics on the governor's budget and our proposals will come through that committee process. And I'm going to...
So give it time.
Yes.
So just for the viewers for timeline, you get a governor's budget, then you set targets for what the overall budget is
After the
supposed to be.
forecast.
After the forecast
Right.
comes out.
I was going to
And then the
ask you if you're
committees
going to
figure
wait
out
for the
what-
forecast to come.
And then the committees have the different parts that they take a look at, so that, we're talking about in the next month probably
Yeah.
before that comes.
Yep.
Is
We wanted to
Dr.
switch to
Well, I was
something
just
else.
going to, during the bad years in Dr. Stenson, we call him Dr. Doom up here, that's just, he would present these budgets that were very gloomy and dim, but hopefully that's turning, shifting. Both of you can agree that the state needs to get its economy rolling again, and it seems like that's happening in some measure. So
Minnesotans
you
have been
expecting a
through-
good forecast?
Minnesotans have been through a rough stretch. Americans have been, through the recession, and I think they've done very hard work and good work. You know, families across the state have worked very hard to keep their families afloat
Tightening
through
the
that.
old
Yep, they
belt?
have.
Yeah.
And you can start to feel, I think, in many places, the economy is getting stronger month by month, year by year.
We only have a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to get to this healthcare exchange, and then it's Gun Week up here at the Capitol. That's what they're calling it, Gun Week. So we had to talk about that. But just briefly, can we touch on these healthcare
Sure.
exchanges? And
It seems like one thing that the DFL majority will act on quickly because of deadlines and so on and general agreement, I think, within the caucus is the creation of a Minnesota-based healthcare exchange.
they've already set up a website.
I think.
Hicks.
It's Hicks, yes, that's very good. What are the prospects for that moving forward? Is it ready to go? Are there people for and opposed, or you got this big grand coalition, or no?
In the Minnesota House of
Or
Representatives.
why have a separate Minnesota exchange in the first place?
Well, from my perspective, it's important that we have our own exchange because it will embed our own ideas. And Minnesota's been a leader in healthcare for a long time, and I think we can do a better job than an exchange that would be imposed on us by the federal government. I just think we have better ideas, and we can tailor something for Minnesota.
Senator Hann, I've heard one Republican say they'd rather call 612 than 202 for the healthcare exchange.
To me, I think part of the reality is that whatever we do will be under the direction of the federal government. So we're going to be putting up something under the direction of what the federal government says we can do, and we will not be able to do what they say we cannot do. So part of this, I think, is fictional in the sense that it's not going to be what we want to do. We're operating under their timetable. We're going to do what they ask us to do, and we're going to do it under their direction, and we will not be permitted to do anything that they don't want us to do. So to say this is a Minnesota-based thing is a little bit disingenuous in my view. I think one of the things that I found remarkable as this has gone through, at least in the Senate, is there have been almost no questions asked on the part of the DFL members of the committees as this bill has gone through the process. We have offered, on the Republican side, I think 20 amendments to the bill that we have thought would improve the sort of the market sensitivity to what this exchange, and there are things in many cases that businesses have said that need to be a part of the thinking on this bill, governance structure, among other things. Every one of those amendments has been rejected by the majority. They're asking for, and they talked a lot about bipartisanship, about working with Republicans, working with the business community, but right now they have a bill that is not going to be supported by anybody except Democrats in the legislature. I think that's...
Isn't that where the votes are, though?
Well, again, if you want to pass a bill and say Democrats in the legislature support this and that's it, that's great, but if you say we want to have a broad support among the public, that's not going to necessarily win that.
In the Minnesota House, I will just say that Representative Atkins is carrying the bill, and Kurt Doubt, the minority leader, has designated Tara Mack, Jim Abler, and Joe Hoppe to work with Representative Atkins so that we can get after the goal of bipartisanship. We're serious about that, and we hope the Republicans are as well. It is a really complex piece of legislation. It is a Minnesota-based piece of legislation, but it is complex. It's going to have a lot of hearings.
Okay.
And you know, we're on a tight timeline because we didn't work on this in the last couple of years, but the administration has and Minnesotans have, and there's a lot of support from parts of the business community, from the chamber. They're all taking a look at this piece of legislation. A lot of providers like it. So I think that, you know, as usual, Minnesotans are working very hard to try and make sure this represents an innovation for Minnesota that will allow Minnesotans who are having a hard time buying insurance because they're in the individual or small business market, they will finally have an avenue to be able to buy insurance that's affordable, that they can understand, and that meets their needs.
We'll talk about tight timelines. We're just about out of time, but I wanted to ask you both a little bit about Old Gun. There's 20 bills relating to gun or gun control or some kind of legislation relating to guns. Everything from restricting assault weapons and magazines to arming teachers in classrooms. What's your positions?
I think that, you know, in the wake of what happened in Newtown, you know, it is hard for me as a mom or as a, you know, representative not to give some attention to this issue. And as they're hearing the bills in the Minnesota House, they're taking, you know, careful consideration from Minnesotans. There's a lot of people there that are testifying. They're not going to act on these bills right now. The purpose of this is to try and lift up the issues and figure out where there is consensus around ideas. And while I have seen, and this continues to be an issue that can polarize people across the country, there does seem to be more of desire, more leadership on the part of many to say we shouldn't allow our kids to be harmed in this way. And we should rise above our political divisions and try and find some common sense solutions. That is the goal of these
Yeah.
hearings. I think it's, I don't think any one of these bills is necessarily going to be the bill, but out of this process will likely come a common sense proposal that Minnesotans
Yeah.
will support.
Senator Hann.
Well, I think-
Well, I just wanted to mention that what Representative Murphy said resonates with, I think, people when she says there's some things I hope that are still left and sacred out there that transcend politics. One of them is trying to go explain to some parent when their kid's just been killed by some lunatic. Not separating the gun issue. What,
Well, there's never.
President was in town. Did you go? Did he invite you over?
He
or
didn't
was there
invite
any
me.
Conversation?
I guess I wasn't surprised he didn't invite me.
I
but
wasn't
you
there
wasn't-
either, but that's okay. I was here working
I
for
had
the
lots
people.
of Facebook friends who sent photos that were great.
Well, and obviously, you have a tragedy such as what happened, and there's no rationalizing that. There's no excuse for it. And anyone who's a parent, as I am, or even if you're not a parent,
Right.
to look at that and say, it just doesn't make sense. It's not explainable, and there's nothing you can do to make that feel any better. And there's no way to defend that or to try to make that.
It doesn't fit into the gun issue debate at all,
Well,
does it?
in my
really?
view, one of the problems here is to say that doing something to restrict ownership by law-abiding citizens of guns is going to fix that problem, and there's no evidence that it does. And that, I think, is part of the problem.
And yet people want something done by their leaders.
Well, that's the frustration. People look at a tragedy like that, and people are angry, and they're frustrated, and they feel, what can we do? And they say, do something. I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten where people say, do something, okay? But if in the course of doing something, you go out and you try to pass a bill, if that bill does nothing to really address that problem, have you really done anything?
And
I
I
think
think-
that's the thing that we're struggling with.
I think we need to push beyond what that frame is of, law-abiding citizens and gun ownership. Push beyond that. It is almost like a comfort zone of a political argument. We shouldn't stop there. We should figure out what we can do. What about background checks? What about the mental illness issue and making sure that people who are felons don't get access to guns? I just think we need to just take off the political argument just a little bit and think about what we can do for Minnesota if we're not afraid of the political ramifications, and instead think about what is. I agree with you, Senator Hann. I don't think we should pass a piece of legislation that's not going to matter. But I think we shouldn't stop because the political argument is a hard one. I think we should push through that and figure out what would matter and what can we agree to that is common sense for Minnesota.
I will say, in the 4 years I was in the legislature with Democrats with wide majorities, no one even brought up gun issues. And
Right.
now people are actually talking about it, and I don't know what will come out of it, but to even have the discussion, I think is illuminating, because no one's even talked about it. So we haven't thought through any of it, about what might work and what doesn't work.
Glad, we've got to let you go. Cliff, anything from Twitter universe for the representative and senator?
Yeah, so one of our questions from the Twitterverse is about gun control, and it's all about the sportsmen that use weapons like the AR-15, which is classified as an assault rifle. What do you say to those sportsmen? How do you tell them that they cannot use that weapon? Yeah.
I don't have one of those weapons, so I can't say I'm intimately familiar, but what I understand is that typically what you're talking about is just an appearance, that the functioning of the weapon is really no different than other weapons that may have a very standard appearance. So this is part of the frustration, that weapons get labeled as, quote, an assault weapon when they really have no different functioning than any other standard type of rifle. And that's where there's a frustration of saying, well, what are you really trying to do? Are you trying to ban a weapon because it looks like something that is dangerous, or are you trying to ban a weapon because it really is dangerous? These are not automatic weapons. They're not machine guns. They are what are called semi-automatic, which means that every time you pull the trigger, you fire a shot. Well, that's what a pistol does. That's what an ordinary rifle does. So the fact that they look different isn't, in many people's opinion, a reason to ban that weapon. Now, why some people prefer that, I don't know, but I don't think that's a reason to ban that particular type of gun.
And I'm married to Big Joe Faust, and He's a hunter, and there are certainly a variety of guns that are stored safely in our home. And, you know, I come from, you know, a family of people who hunt and fish, and I know that is an important and rich tradition in Minnesota and many parts of the country. So I think that we can, engage in the conversation, and I think we can honor sportsmen and that tradition. And as I listen to my family members and people across Minnesota, I think there's room there. I think there's room to talk about the kind of weaponry that people use for hunting to make sure that we are honoring our sportsmen and sportswomen across the state. And I am not sure that banning a certain kind of gun is going to solve the problem. But I don't think that we should limit our conversation about that, limit our contemplation of solutions because we're afraid of the political arguments that we might face.
Well, that's all we have time for tonight. I want to thank both of you for taking the time to come over and talk to us tonight, and to the folks out there. Representative Erin Murphy is the House Majority Leader, and you can look her up and her bills at the Minnesota Legislature website. Senator David Hann is the Minority Leader for the Republicans over in the Senate, and you can find out about him at the same place, and the bills moving through there, and you can find out more about all of these subjects at minnesotacapitalnews.com. All right, that's all we have time for tonight. I'm Marty Owings, live from the Capitol, and we had production assistance from Catherine Loudenslager, our producer, from Cliff Dahlberg, our media producer, and of course my co-host Paul Gardner. I want to thank our guests tonight, Representative Erin Murphy, the House Majority Leader, and also Senator Hann, the Republican Minority Leader in the Senate. And to all you out there, have a great week. We'll see you at the Capitol.